Good morning, everyone. Let's warm up a little bit. And the other side. Lee circles. And reverse. And shoe circles. And reverse. And pain circles. And reverse. And reverse. And reverse. Okay, you can put away your sticks.
I was learning about the indigenous stories about this part of the country.
Yes.
I knew a little bit about the relationship between Mount Hood, Mount Adams, and Mount St. Helens.
They're all related, right?
Yes. Well, Mount Hood and Mount Adams were in love with Mount St. Helens.
Mm.
And they got into a big
fight over
big
it.
fight over.
This is what always happens
yes.
in mountains.
And Mount Hood squashed Mount Adams' fire, so he no longer could smoke.
Interesting.
That's how they talk about it. The other thing, I was a little bit aware of that, but the other thing I had no idea about was at one point all the mountains up here became islands. It had flooded. All the people retreated to the mountaintops.
Well, that would have been during the post-glacial floods.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about that.
I don't know whether you guys are hearing all this, but it's kind of interesting. Post-glacial floods, right?
Yeah.
Post-glacial floods carved out the gorge, carved out the Willamette Valley, carved out the Scablands, etc., etc. In the past couple of weeks, we've talked about the Dantian and the rotational axis. Today, we're going to talk about the equator. And then next week, we're going to tie all three of them together and talk about the real secret of Hunyuan and Chen style Tai Chi, which you should already know. Nevertheless, we're going to talk about that real secret. So today we're going to focus on the equator, but before we do that, I want to go back and review some of the Dantian material and the rotational axis material, rotational and geomagnetic poles, right? But I want you to do it. So this is going to be a midterm. So I'm going to suggest or ask you guys, let's focus on the Dantian. Tell me what the Dantian does, all right? It does half a dozen different things. So tell me what it does. Jill, give me an idea.
It's your stability, your stabilizer.
Yes, that's true. Right? How does it stabilize things?
I think of it as like kind of like a weight that's sort of to
Yes.
in place and attached to the earth.
Yes, that's true. Attached to the earth. But the weight could be anywhere. It could be your right ear. It could be your left foot. Why does the Dantian work?
Because it's at the center of your core.
Yes. All right. So number one, Kevin, would you write these down? Keep score on this. All right. So the number one thing that it does is provide a center. It's not that it provides a center; it is the center. Right? So just below your navel, 2 fingers below your navel, in the middle of the body is your Dantian, and that's the center of everything. Okay, where else could you go with that? So what does the center do? Catherine, what does the center do?
Everything I knew about dancing, Jill said it, so I'm not sure that I can add anything to it. It's where the energy is. I mean, the energy starts from there and goes there.
Yes. Okay. So there's
starts
one
and
thing.
Ends.
I'm sorry. Say again.
Starts and ends.
Starts and ends. So Kevin, write that down. So this is the storehouse for energy.
Yeah.
There's an acupuncture point in the front of the Dantian called Qi Hai, which means the ocean of Qi. So sometimes the Dantian is just called the ocean of Qi. This is the ocean. This is where all your energy is stored. And when you move or do anything else, that's going to use some energy, as Catherine just said, it comes out and it also goes back in. All right. Okay. What else does the Danshan do? Barbara.
It mirrors the innermost inner core of the earth and provides a physical, mirror of what the
Yeah.
chi does
Yes.
by racing around in this ever active motion, circular motion.
Motion, right? Spinning motion. So, yes, the Danshan, to my mind, obviously to Barbara's too, I think reflects and is connected to the center of the earth. I don't think that's by chance. Another way to talk about that is maybe a little less physical and a little more metaphysical. This is, after all, the point through which you came into the world. This is where your navel was attached to your mother. Um, you could say it's still attached just to our greater mother, the earth. Um, and it's also it's a doorway. Now, all the chakras can be doorways. So we talked about the Danshan as a storehouse, but it can also be talked about as a doorway, meaning to another dimension, you could say. All the chakras can and do that. So in that sense, it's a singularity. So Kevin, write that one down. Yes, Genevieve.
I have one I don't think we talk about in class very much, but for me, the more I've learned about my danshan, the more I can use it as like a pulse check. Like if I put my hands on my danshan and my mind on my danshan and I don't feel anything, that is a cue to me that I'm doing poorly. I'm not taking care of myself. I'm not marshaling my resources. I'm just like flat. And when I'm doing well, I can actually have the opposite. I can put my hands on my danshan and I can actually feel that circulation and momentum that Baba and Catherine and Jill mentioned. And
Yeah.
that tells me like you're actually okay. Your chi is
Yeah.
okay. You can now like strengthen it. You're not missing anything. You just build on what you have.
Yeah.
And I've had
And
both of those feelings.
you even feel your own heartbeat down here. So it's there's a hexagram in the I Ching called the well. And the well in the I Ching is kind of the great cosmic universal well. It's a place you draw water from. So this is our own personal version, I think, of that. All right. When you touch here and there's no water in the well, you know something's wrong. You need to take care of yourself a little better. When you touch here and you feel, oh, okay, it's nice and full. I'm really present. All right. Good. Okay, Jack, any ideas?
Nothing much to add to what's been said, except functionally, I think of it as that storehouse of energy in the center of which is a still point that you can direct with your intention.
Yeah, so Jack's, even though he didn't add any, says he's not adding anything. In fact, he's adding some of the most important stuff. So one is the still point. Now we sort of touched on that a little bit before, in the sense that this is a singularity. When you get to the still point, you've gone all the way down through motion and you've gotten to this what's actually a singularity. And it opens up on the other side in a different dimension. But that still point, it's the still point of the turning world. In our world, everything is moving all the time, right? Even in our own bodies. But as with all music, you need some stillness within the music. Some people actually listen more to the stillness than they do to the notes themselves. So the still point is absolutely critical in Tai Chi and in Qigong to always be in touch with inner quiet. Annie has several meditations that she does, some of which she's worked out herself, which really have to do with that still point. And they're very good meditations. Maybe one of these days she'll lead us through one of those. What was the other thing Jack mentioned? Jack, what was the other thing you mentioned after the still
I
point?
was mentioning directing the chi with using your intention.
Yeah, so probably the second most important thing is that the Dantian in a certain way defines the directions in space, because there are three dimensions, right? Front to back, side to side, and level. And the Dantian can turn in any of those directions, which is another way of saying your center can turn in any of those directions. So you define directions in movement through the Dantian, not through your ear, not through your thumbs, right, but through your Dantian. It's a Dantian that leads, and everything else follows. Carlos, any ideas?
Nothing more that hasn't really been said. Kind of covers my, the extent of my knowledge. The center of mass, the equivalent force, or anything applied to the Dantian is the same as applying it through your body itself.
Yeah.
And it's your connection to both the physical and the spirit, since that's
Yeah.
where you connect to your parents and your Jing becomes Qi.
Yes. So Carlos just mentioned two things which are very important. One of which we've talked about, and one of which we haven't really much in class, but I'll just mention it. When he was talking about Jing turning into Qi, he's talking about the theory of the three burners. A burner is just a little cooker, right? When I was in China, you'd go to a restaurant and you'd order a meat dish, and they would take a little burner out onto the sidewalk and they'd cook it out there on the sidewalk, right? And then they would bring it back in. So you have three burners, right? The lower Dantian, the middle Dantian, and the upper Dantian. When Carlos was mentioning Jing turning into Qi, Jing is an energy that precedes Qi. Qi is the energy of movement and of life. Jing is even more primitive than that. It's like a really primitive biological energy. It's really sort of our metabolism. It's often associated with the sexual function and metabolism. And in order for that to turn into Qi, it needs to be heated up. All right, so you put it on the little burner and heat it up, and what comes off it is steam. And that steam is your Qi. In fact, the original logogram for Qi was a Chinese dish or bowl with steam coming up off it.
Rice bowl.
Rice bowl, and steam coming up off. That steam is the Qi. And then the Qi is cooked in another burner, and that turns into Shun, which really means your spirit. So you're talking about three levels of energy. Each energy has its own independent existence, but actually they're three stages of evolution. So the kind of just biological energy, Qi energy, which is a higher energy, and then Shun energy, which is even higher. The Jing energy is almost as physical. It's got that kind of gross physical energy. Qi energy is much more refined. Right? So it has to do with movement and with thought and with music and with life. Shun energy is even more rarefied. Right? You almost can't even see it. Sometimes you can't even feel it if you're not paying attention. Right? So that's an aspect of the Dantian we haven't really talked about. But the middle Dantian is is one of the main burners where you cook your Jing, which really has to do with Chinese internal alchemy. So it's on the Qigong side of things. The other closely related aspect of that is, well, which Carlos mentioned, you've got a physical body, but you've also got an energy body, and you've got a mental body, and you've got a spiritual body. And one of the problems with civilization, and it doesn't matter which civilization you're talking about, is those bodies get separated or even dissociated. So your physical body, if you grew up in the Midwest, you're not even quite sure where your physical body is, unless you were lucky and got into athletics. Your energy body, nobody knows about. Mental body, yeah, people kind of get their male body. And your spiritual body is somewhere over the rainbow. So all those things tend to get kind of separated. And when you get into usually midlife, you start asking questions about all that, and you usually seek out some modality through which to bring them back together. And that can be through a religious tradition or a philosophical tradition. My grandfather did it through golf, or you can do it through Tai Chi and Qigong. And Tai Chi and Qigong, especially Qigong, are really aware that if you practice this consistently over a long period of time, it will help bring those four bodies together. And it does it in a very specific way. It combines your mind with your energy body. Right? So it's healing that rift between your mental and your energy bodies. And when you do that, as you heal that, it will bring your physical body into the deal too, and it will also make room for and bring in your spiritual body. So rather than focusing on the spiritual, it kind of focuses on the energy instead, and the spiritual comes in later. And he calls that the backdoor method. Right? You don't approach it straight on. You kind of go around and use the back door. Right? It's a little more informal.
Well, speaking of resistance,
Yes.
that's why you use the backdoor method.
You
Avoid the resistance.
Yes, Jill, pay attention to this. It's important. There are resistances in human beings to doing all kinds of things
that are good for them.
that are good for them. So rather than take those things on straight ahead, right, and try to get in the front door, you just be a little gentle about it, right? You just go around and knock on the back door. All right. We're not coming for a big visit in the front door. We're just coming on the back door for a cup of coffee. That's all it is, all right? Jose, how about you? Any thoughts?
For me, the Jen is the beginning of everything. Like for me is just movement, but it's definitely more. It all starts on the dungeon.
I couldn't catch the last. What you said the last? Dungeon. Yeah. So one of the things, this may or may not have to do with what Jose said, but one of the things you can think of the Dantian is doing as being the target of your breathing. So I thought of that because of Jose saying this is like the first thing, right? When you breathe in Tai Chi and Qigong, you don't breathe into the upper part of the lungs. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not enough, right? Instead, you breathe all the way down into your belly, that is specifically into the Dantian. So that you're engaging the whole abdominal cavity from here all the way down to here. All right. Kevin, any ideas?
was weird. I think it's pretty much been said. From a scientific point of view, which is where I always operate from, this is all still a mystery to me. Okay. Maybe it's resistance. I don't know, but I can't get over it.
Yes, that is resistance. That is resistance. And the way to get past Kevin's resistance is to give him something that he just absolutely loves, which is poetry. All right? Just give him some poetry. You can, if you want, you can think about all these things simply as metaphors. All right? They're metaphors for processes in our body, but you know, actually, I think they're real. Genevieve, yeah.
I have a note based on what Kevin said. I'm kind of in the same boat, and the way that Malcolm and Annie tricked me into starting to actually be like, oh, maybe the metaphors are real, is they said, just use your imagination. They're like, if this is all like, doesn't feel like anything, you can't get it going, just pretend you can feel it. And actually over however many years I've been doing that actually worked. Using my imagination to pretend I felt it led me into actually feeling it. And it like overwhelmed my skepticism just because it started actually happening. So
Yeah,
it was
exactly.
that was my evolution, Kevin. I respect you.
It's not that I don't know where my dantian is. It's not that I don't breathe through my dantian. I just have different explanations for what's happening.
Well, you know, if you're using different words or different images, there's nothing wrong with that. Just use whatever language works for you. There are folks who really do have a built-in resistance to anything like this because it's woo-woo. It's woo-woo, you know. Well, okay, well, I guess from a certain point of view, you can look at it and go, yeah, it's woo-woo. I can remember, I've told you guys this story before, but I can remember when I first started with Master Zhang, uh, you know, he probably had 30 or 40 students on any given day. And we were all sort of just beginning in the first year or so with him. And we were going, oh, what's he talking about? I mean, we knew the words, we knew qi, and we discovered pretty quick Dan Chen. But the question was, is that stuff real? Right? Or is it just a metaphor? So is qi real? Is your dantian real? Right? And it's of course you should ask that question. Everyone's going to ask that question. And, you know, I didn't feel my dantian. I didn't feel my qi. So it was like, well, okay, I'll assume it's real because this guy's telling me it's real. And he can do things that I don't understand. So something is going on that I want to investigate a little bit more. This was also true for the Chinese students. They had a whole cultural background in which these things are important. Qi is important in Chinese culture. It's not just a Tai Chi thing. It's a whole cultural thing. And qi is not just something that you get in a martial art. Qi is the energy that runs the universe. So there's a million kinds of qi, and they're all part of qi, right? So it's a big deal over there, particularly in traditional culture.
Just so you guys know, I've been doing this for almost 18 years now, and I've been his disciple for almost 10 years. So this is
it takes some time, and those of us who were students of Master Zhang, I can remember people asking him, well, is this real? You know, real, like, you know, like real. And he said, well, yeah, it is. But you're going to have to find it in yourself. And so, you know, after a while, we stopped asking him questions because the answer was always the same.
Yeah, especially when you were spitting that gravel.
And it took years of practice, and then after a while, what happened is you would sometimes there would be very specific signs of the Dantian waking up. Um, it's like something that's been there, but it hasn't been online before. It's like you haven't got it plugged in.
Yeah.
So now you plug it in, and it's and it starts to hum a little bit. You start to get a little vibration. You go, oh, well, there actually is something there.
Yeah, and your nervous system gets involved.
Yeah, and your nervous system, the other systems in the body start to respond to this a little bit. So it can even be quite dramatic. It usually isn't. It's usually maybe you'll get a little of this or a little of that. A lot of people don't even get that. It just grows very, very quietly, the kind of awareness of it. But what happens is one day after 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 years, you go, well, of course there's a Danshan. I can feel it. You know right where it is. It's right here. I can feel it. The same way I feel my ear, right? And when you are interacting with other people in push hands, you're feeling that and feeling it work. When you're doing qigong, and you're expanding and contracting, you're expanding and contracting from the Danshan. So is it real? Yeah, it's very real. But like anything else, you're not really aware of it at first. It has to grow a little bit. Annie had an interesting experience with physical symptoms of her lower chakras opening up. Now, my take on it is it wasn't her Danshan per se, which is the third chakra, it's the middle Danshan, but really hers was the first chakra, if I understood it right. So the root chakra.
The root chakra.
So tell them about that.
I think I've been practicing for about a year, and all of a sudden, I was in touch with a constant vibration in my perineum. And this went on for probably another year, and it was almost constant. And then slowly that subsided. It was quite interesting phenomenon. And then that slowly subsided, and I started having the same sensation in arcs, first on the right side and then on the left side. And then that went on for probably a year. And then that slowly subsided as well.
So these symptoms like that are quite common. They don't always start in the Danshan. Mine didn't either. Right? Mine actually started in the root chakra too. This stuff is closely related to what they call Kundalini awakening, or Kundalini energy. All right. So it happens a little differently for everybody. Like I said, there's a whole spectrum from very soft to quite dramatic. If you get a dramatic opening and you're not ready for it, it can be quite negative because you resist it. Speaking of resistance, Joe, you resist. I don't know what this is. Something bad's going on, right? If I don't know what it is, it must be bad. Or it's just like any wild animal or bird, something they don't understand is going on. They figure, well, I better protect myself from that. And that resistance can really cause troubles. I know exactly what was happening with Annie as she described it. It's literally like bzz, bzz,
yeah, it is. It is.
Right? It's just like a little buzz.
Yeah,
Right?
it is. It's a buzz, and you kind of expect it to make noise. It's so. It's so
if you're not,
strong.
yes, exactly. It can be quite strong.
And it's very interesting to be in a big board meeting with this going on.
You're trying to talk to the other board members and the president of the board.
I'm trying to stay on task.
You see, excuse me, my root chakra is buzzing.
Sorry.
I have to take a break. Anyway, these things are very common. For the Danshan itself, it's very common to develop a little knocking in there, right? It's like a little boom, 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 almost like a heartbeat sort of thing, et cetera, et cetera. You can have, I was going to say it's imaginal, but it's you would swear when it happens that it's actually really happening, that your danshan just expands, and you will see colors, and right. How can I say it's not? You don't see them with your eyes. You see it with something else anyway. It like expands, boom, and it may stay that way for a while, and then it's probably going to retreat back to where it began. All those kinds of symptomologies are very common in Danshan development. Um, if they happen for you, they'll probably just happen spontaneously. Don't worry about them. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. If something hurts, that's different. But if it just happens naturally, don't worry about it. Okay, Kevin, anything else? So how many things did we write down?
3, 4, 5, 6, looks like.
6. Okay. So I tell you what, do me a favor and send those to me in an email. And we'll wrap that up. Okay, we're running out of time here, so we've got another 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes. I want to at least touch on what we're going to do next week. So last week we talked about the rotational axis, and along with that, the geomagnetic axis. If the world were mathematically perfect, those two would be the same axis, but they're not, because the Earth is on a 23.5 degree tilt. Its axis is on a tilt. And the geomagnetic core of the Earth has a mind of its own. It spins faster than the Earth rotates, and it has lots of convection cells inside the core, and it has all kinds of rhythms that we are still just sort of discovering. So one of the rhythms I mentioned last week is the geomagnetic poles shift from time to time on an average of about 750,000 years. The South Pole will go to the north and the North Pole will go to the south. That's a process that usually takes 3,000 to 5,000 years to happen. They can tell all that because it's recorded in the layers of rock that have been deposited. And we are apparently going into one of those phases right now. It's already started a little bit. So right now, our compasses point sort of toward the north. If you look this up online, it's really interesting to see how the geomagnetic north, it's actually the South Pole, but the geomagnetic south pole, which is on the rotational North Pole, how it has shifted over time. And it's not just a couple of feet, it's literally hundreds and hundreds of miles, maybe even 1,000 miles, just over the last century. So yeah, the compass points toward the north, but it's not the same north that it would have been 100 years ago. And what's happening is it's beginning its shift. It may take another 3,000 years to shift, but it's going to go through this process. And as it goes through the process, the magnetic poles will split up. So there won't be one South Pole and one North Pole. There might be literally a dozen of each of them. And they're kind of moving around inside the Earth as the magnetic fluid within the Earth changes, which means it's going to be very interesting to do anything with a compass. All right? Next week, I want to talk about, and we didn't really do anything on the rotational pole. And I sort of held that back on purpose because we're going to do that next week when we talk about the equator of the Earth, right? So let me look at the blackboard here a second. All right, so there's the rotational pole, the Dantian, the rotational pole, and we've got one more thing to put on, and that is the equator. I'll try to get this straight. That look straight up?
A little down on the right. Yeah.
That good?
Yeah, good enough.
Okay, so this completed symbol this is the basic structure of the Earth's energy body. The gravitational center, the rotational and geomagnetic poles, and the equator, which marks what is called in physics the moment of greatest inertial mass. So you can see at the equator, if you look at it, that's the widest part of the Earth. So the Earth is spinning around and around and around. Well, there's not much mass up at the poles, because the Earth is quite a bit smaller. But down at the equator, it's quite a bit bigger, which means the inertia, the energy held around the equator is greater than anywhere else. All right? We also, here I have to get in here, we also have the same thing. We've got the Dantian, you've got the rotational pole, and then you've got the equator. And the equator in a human being is called the DAIMAI, which you could translate literally as the belt meridian. All right? So those three things work together to basically create the whole energy body. Now, in the human being, I'm going to get rid of this here. In the human being, you've got all these acupuncture points and you've got energy channels, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all secondary to this basic layout that we've got here. If you understand this, you've got the foundation of the energy body. Everything else gets built on top of that. And that's true for Qigong, which can get quite complex in its consideration of energy channels and acupuncture points. And it's really true of Tai Chi, because Tai Chi is about simplifying things. It's about movement. It's very practical. All right? So understanding this for Tai Chi will, if you understand this in your own body and in your own movement, you will get Tai Chi, because that's what Tai Chi actually is. So next week, we're going to start from this basis here and look at, Kevin, another metaphor that I'm sure you will love, which is really more than a metaphor. It really is true. All right? And I'm just gonna leave it at that, and we'll pick it up next week, and I'll give you the big secret of what the metaphor really is. But it's true for the Earth. It's absolutely true for the Earth. Even in a physics class, they would say this, and it's also true for you. Okay, guys, let's take a little break for about 15 minutes and then we'll do the Tai Chi class.